So, good morning. So, we were talking about cyber resilience review. So, what I want to do first today is to actually show you a cyber resilience review we did for IIT Kanpur in the previous version of this class, where the class was divided into 10 groups. Each group did one of the domains, right? And the way it worked is that they went to the CC and or actually they sent the questions to CC and they got responses, and based on the responses they made their choices, and then some result came out. If we do it today, ideally I should have done it this time with you guys, but for some reason things got a little bit delayed, so we do not have enough time to do it, because it requires about 1.5 months or so to do it, because we cannot suddenly bombard the engineers who are already very busy to answer questions from 10 different groups, right. But anyway, so I want to show you what we got, not to just not to analyze what we got, but just to show you what it looks like to get a cyber resilience review. So, this is so they have a pre-designed PDF file that you can download. I have made it available on the class website, where you can actually fill in things. Like for example, you can see that. So, you can see that we have these buttons which allows you to do a revision of the assessment, or print the report. The report gets automatically generated by the program, the scripts embedded into the PDF. So, what we see here is, so this is a kind of instruction. So, this is what we call a self-assessment report. So, there are two ways to do this report. One is self-assessment. The organization itself does assessment by itself after having studied the goals of each domain and practices in each domain and understanding, and then asking the relevant stakeholders within the organization about those practices, how well they are being implemented, etc. And then you can generate the report. Another is to actually what is called a facilitated assessment, where somebody from Homeland Security will come to your organization and you will have a all day or couple of days of workshop, where all the stakeholders will be present and the facilitators will actually explain each question and will actually ask you for the answers, and you as stakeholders who know about what is being done currently will talk about that, right. So, so this was done like in November 2022. So, this is table of content is auto generated. This is some DHS notification. So, this is overview and scope, right. So, as we will see that it is very important to decide the scope, because see you can like for example, if you are a bank, right. So, bank has many critical functions, business processes. One is to, for example, give out loans, right, loans processing. Another critical function is to enable payments, right. So, people do payments using checks, using NEFT, using IMPS, using RTGS, using UPI, using maybe RuPay credit card and so on. So, all these things are different processes, business processes, and each of these there are certain goals in terms of service. For example, RBI requires that your mean downtime per month should be no more than so many minutes, right, for payment system, or your time to recovery if it goes down should be no more than this number, right. And if it does exceed that RBI stipulation, then they have to answer to RBI as to why they exceeded the stipulated time frame, right. So, same thing with the loan processing, there are certain goals. For example, how fast between the application and a decision it has to be, what is the risk level that you are allowed to take, what should be the goal for your non-performing loans, that is loans that are unlikely to come back, etc. So, each function of an organization will have different sets of goals. So, now in an academic institute, for example, we have a lot of important functions such as registration process, right. Even though the registration process is only in effect from certain times, right. So, certain time windows it is in effect, but during the registration time we do not want like the registration process to shut down or crash. We do not want that the registration process does any mistake in terms of assigning courses to the one that you apply versus the one that you actually is assigned. So, there are certain goals that has to be set. Now, when these goals are set, then only you can think about the cyber security, right. So, because if there is no goal set, what is this? Of course, there is also data security, data privacy issue, that you do not want at any cost any data to be leaked, right. So, that is irrespective of business, what business it is. Anytime there is a personally identifiable information, you do not want that to be leaked. And today in India, now we have the Data Privacy Act passed. It has not been notified yet, but once it is in effect, then it will be, it may cost according to the new law DPDP Act, it will be up to 250 crores penalty per time this breach happens, plus the affected individuals can also sue the company and so on. So, that is separate, like the privacy and data confidentiality. But other than that, to get the businesses actually meeting its business goals, one has to actually then think about what are the risks to not achieving the goals. Each business process may have multiple different goals, and you have to see what are the risks that will stop me from achieving my goals. For example, in case of a payment system, if it is like 30 minutes per month that I can be down, then what are the risks, right. And among many risks, there would be a risk about cyber, right. So, not every risk is related to cyber. For example, there may be a risk where the system may crash, right, just because it has become an old server or something, or the server has some manufacturing defect. So, do we have backup server, live standby, so that if one crashes, the other can take over within seconds and all that stuff. So, those risk mitigation was unrelated to cyber attack related risks. So, what we are doing here is that saying that, okay, so among all the risks, assuming that all the other risks are taken care of, if I have this cyber risk and I get attacked and I get affected, then am I going to be able to still provide service and recover to normal service quality in as soon as possible, and that mean time to recover or mean time to perform may actually be also part of the business goals, right. I may want to recover within maybe 30 minutes or 1 hour or whatever. So here the question is, what is the scope? So, while this was done, the scope was not very well defined. So, we have multiple different businesses. For example, we have not business processes, like registration is one, payroll is another, Dean R&D automation, office automation is another. There could be automation of the gates through which cars come into the campus, that is also an automated computerized system. you have power generation, power transmission or power distribution plants, substations across the at various locations in the campus. Those are also possible things, and sewage control, water pumping and all that stuff are business processes. Now question is, what is critical for this organization? This organization, now who will decide what is critical, right? So the board of governors will determine what is critical. You and I cannot determine. Like for example, as a resident of the campus, if water doesn't come, I get really inconvenienced, and therefore I could say that that is critical, right? But actually what is the business in which this organization is into, and that is the education and research business, and therefore the criticality will be determined by that. Like is it that our won't be able to run courses, or we won't be able to do registration during registration period, or you won't be able to process payroll payments during the payment cycle and things like that, right? Whether the research expenditure etc. cannot be done because office automation is not working, or email system. The email system is very important for an academic institute to run. The email system may actually get broken by a cyber attack, then or the email system may actually be used to spoof the users and then get into bigger cyber attacks and so on. So all these things you have to decide what scope in which you are trying to determine the resilience. Similarly, you can also do organizational scope. So you do not necessarily have to do the scoping based on service. So you can say, I want to see these two services, the resilience of these two services. Other services, I don't care if it is resilient, as long as it is more or less resilient. So I may not do this kind of minute analysis. But on the another way to do this is to in an organizational scope. For example, I can decide that only the office automation is what I am I want to do, or I want to only do computer science department, right? So I want to do the resilience of computer science department because computer science guys are asking for it, right? So that's the kind of scoping has to be done. In this case, what happened is the scoping was done for everything, right? So almost like email to office automation to Pingla to payroll system, accounting system, all that stuff, right? So this is little bit of if you include everything in the scope, like it is likely that your maturity will be very low, because there will be some service in which the maturity is not very good, but you get the lowest of all, right? Your maturity level will be given the lowest of all the maturity levels for all the services, right? So here you will see that the maturity level that came out is actually not very high. It was one maturity level out of 5 different maturity levels. We'll see what the results are. And then we already have seen that these are the domains in which I want to do this maturity assessment. So this is the report writer. So this team that worked on this. So I basically made actually 11 teams. So 10 teams were actually filling out the assessment for 10 domains, and then they were sending it to the last team, and the last team was putting it together, right? So they did the final report generation and writing all this basic stuff. So the scoring is that every practice has 3 answers possibly. Yes, we are performing this practice, or I am performing but not to the fullest extent possible, so incomplete, or no means that this is not being done. Not answered is gray, and not answered is not going to help much in terms of it might as well be red, right? If you are not answered, you assume that it is not being done. So for every practice we say that it is green when each domain, so this is for individual practice. So, individual practices can be eventually be colored green, yellow, red or gray, and then you can say that for the overall domain, what is the overall domain's performance, it has to see if all practices are performed, then only the domain gets green. So, even if you miss one practice out of, let us say 15 practices for that domain, then you cannot get green. Partially when some practices are performed, so yellow, so if even if you miss one, you will get yellow, and if no practices are performed, then it is red, right. So, it is red means really bad, no practice is being performed. And then each there is also a maturity level. So, practices are performed or not performed, or semi performed, right. But domains, then domains become that based on whether all practices are performed or some practices are performed or no practices are performed. But the maturity level is how the practices are implemented, right. So, MIL 0 really bad, only some goals are achieved, right. So, MIL 0 means that that there are domains, for each domain there are some practices or some goals for which actually no all practices are achieved. If all goals are achieved for a particular domain, then that means that all practices are being done, then I get MIL 1. So, for a domain, let us say there are 5 goals, and let us say there are 20 practices across all the goals. If I am doing all the practices, that is all the practices are green, then that particular goal will be achieved, and then if all goals are achieved for a particular domain, then we will say it is in the first maturity level. Then if I want to see if I want to be better than first maturity level, then I have to not only get all the MIL 1, that is I have to get all the goals achieved, but then there are specific things that I have to do, and we will go into that what specific things have to be done. Then so this becomes cumulative, that is to get to MIL 3 you have to satisfy MIL 1 and all answers of MIL 2 and all answers of MIL 3, right, and so on and so forth. So, this is how the maturity progresses. So, there are specific names also to remember what each maturity level indicates. So, remember the maturity is about progression in some sense, right. So, higher maturity means I have progressed beyond the previous maturity level, right. So, that is the idea. So, you see that MIL 0 means incomplete, that is some goals are not achieved, right. In a domain is considered incomplete if in that domain some goals are not achieved. Now, if all goals are achieved in a particular domain, then we say that that domain is performed, that is I am performing the practices as required to achieve the goals. Now, MIL 2 is called planned. Now, what that so remember that we said that in MIL 2 what we did is that if to get to MIL 2 I have to answer certain questions on top of MIL 1, right. MIL 1 means performed, and then some additional questions. So, what are those questions? This here you will get the hints of what questions are being asked. So, we are saying that okay, you are performing everything, but have you documented the practices and communicated to all who need to know? See, one of the biggest concern that we see in like we have done, for example, many ports audit, right, cyber audit. We find that depending on who is the CISO, who is the chairman, who is the IT in charge, etc., the practices vary, right, but that should not be the case, right. So, all the ports should have same kind of cybersecurity practices being performed. So, unless it is documented and communicated, it is communicable, then you cannot replicate elsewhere, right, because then you have to really bring the actual person who is doing in one place to bring that person there and ask him to work again from scratch to get that place bring to the same maturity level. That is not practical, right. So therefore, I have to make sure that the person, it is documented and communicable, so it can be replicated elsewhere. Then we are asking like whether there is a plan as to how the practice is performed. So it's not like I am because I know something, I know how to do this practice, but if I leave, then this practice cannot be done by the other people. So there has to be a documented plan, and it has to be supported by stakeholders. That is, the do we know for each practice who are the stakeholders? So in some cases the stakeholder could be the CISO, in some cases the stakeholder could be some IT people who are managing the assets and services. It could be also users, like people who will not bypass authentication and things like that, and are they aware of the practice and their role in the practice. So this has to be properly documented, and then it should be supported by relevant standards and guidelines. So I do not make practices out of thin air. I do not say, okay, this from tomorrow this will be you have to do this, you have to do two-factor authentication, or we have to do endpoint security solution agents on every machine. It has to be supported by standards such as 27001 or guidelines like NIST guideline or RBI guideline or SEBI guideline or some other certain guideline and so on. So it has to have that support. So if you have all this in additional to the fact that you are doing the practices, then you can get to MIL 2, that is a planned, you are in a planned maturity. Then the next one is the managed. To be managed, you have to do all the practices, plus everything has to be documented, planned, stakeholder communicated and so on. On top of that, this particular maturity level talks about governance. So is the practice supported by policy and appropriate oversight over performance of the practice? So see the difference here, and this is important to understand. Here we are saying that the practice is documented and communicable, right. I am not saying that yeah, here it is still kind of dependent on the CISO and the team that is doing it. They are basically documenting it and they are communicating it. Hopefully everybody is listening to the CISO and so on. So therefore it is working out, but it is still not governed by the organization. That is, if this practice documentation is not scripted into a policy, and when we use the word policy, we use little bit more significance to the term policy, because the policy, a document does not become policy until it is adopted by the organization through its highest executive authorities, right, like the board of governors or board of directors. They have to actually consider this and say that from now on we accept this as policy, and therefore it is binding on everybody in the organization, and if they are found to be in violation of any of the policy, then they will be subject to some penalty, and that penalty may also be written into the policy, that they may be suspended depending on the level of violation, they may be fined, suspended, their increments may be reduced, whatever, right, their appraisal may be affected, whatever, that should be in the policy. So that is the appropriate oversight over the performance of the practice. If any of the practices are not performed as per the policy should also state what would be the penalty, and such things should be actually have legally binding. That is, if it is adopted by the board, then it becomes within the organization the law, right, it is a law of the organization. Is appropriately staffed and funded. So this is another thing. See, here the CISO might say I'm going to work 24 hours a day to make this all these practices work. I'm going to work extra to make the documentation and so on, and next CISO goes to another organization, new CISO comes, he says, you know, I'm not going to do all this, I'm going to take it easy. So therefore, the organization should be properly staffed and funded, right. Otherwise, if it depends on this factor that CISO has to do all this because he does not have enough funding and stuff, then it is not unlikely to be sustained, right. So it has to be sustainable, so by properly staffed and funded, which means the top level CEO or such level have supported the cause, supported the cybersecurity cause or resilience cause. Is assigned staff who are responsible and accountable for the performance of the practice. So there is, you know, it should not be like, you know, whoever is doing whatever, right. It has to be properly proper accountability should be there. And then finally is, you know, are the staff adequately trained to perform the practice, right. So this is the biggest hurdle nowadays, because getting properly trained cybersecurity professional is very difficult and very expensive, and therefore this is getting harder. And now what has happened in India is that, so with NCIIPC, in a project with QCI, Quality Council of India, they have not only come up with some policy guidelines for critical infrastructure, but they also have created a very elaborate requirements for what it means to be trained at what level, right, for what kind of job roles in the cybersecurity, what kind of training, what topics, they have drilled down to the very topic level, and that is a very important document that is going to be notified soon. So hopefully it will be adopted by many organizations, and there would be also training organizations that will come up. These training organizations will get accreditation from QCI, Quality Council of India, to train people according to this, right. So that is the idea. So anyway, so this is what it takes to be MIL 3. So MIL 3 is beyond the fact that it is planned, but it is also governed by the organization with the organizational support at the highest level and with proper adequate staff and staff accountability and training. So that is the MIL 3. There is few more that periodically is managed for risk. So risk assessment is properly performed and you know, identified, etc., etc. Now next one, MIL 4, is measured, right. So yesterday, the previous class, I told you about this policy about procurement, right, and we said that there is a elaborate documented, communicated, governed you know, policy about procurement, but we do not measure it. At least I am not aware that we measure its effectiveness, right, whether it actually produces what it is supposed to produce, that is the price discovery. So if you can say that all the practices are not only performed, well planned, managed, governed and monitored and controlled. So this monitoring and controlled is what comes here, measured. So periodically evaluated for effectiveness, monitored and controlled, and objectively evaluated against its practice description and plan, and periodically reviewed with higher level of management. So the CISO goes to the board and says that, okay, here are the goals in this domain for this critical service, and here is where we are, and you know, we may need to change something in our policy, in our plans, and you know, or I may need more funding for more staff, whatever. So that practice, if that practice is periodically reviewed with high level management, then, and the fact that you are actually evaluating its effectiveness, then you are at the MIL 4, that is measured. So the topmost maturity level they are performed, planned, managed, monitored, controlled, and now we are saying it is consistent across all internal constituencies who have vested interest in the performance of the practice. So, this basically says that the same is replicated across the various units of the organization. So, an organization may have multiple units. So, it says defined by the organization and tailored by organizational units for their use and supported by improvement information collected by and shared among organizational units for overall benefit of the organization. So, different subgroups or subunits or whatever of the organization, there has to be they should actually go by the same policy and same practices and plans, but they can tailor, and then they should also, any kind of improvement is made is then collected and shared among all the organizations, so that everybody gets the benefit of this. So, this is the 5th level of maturity. Now, this is how the CRR decided, or this is how the US RMM, the resiliency maturity model, defines maturity. It is, if you read another maturity model like C2M2, it is different. Like it is not necessarily they are defined exactly in the same way, but usually they have a progression of different maturity levels. So, now let us look at the actual thing that we went through last year, last year. Here is the asset management. So, remember asset management had 7 goals, and in November 2022 we found that services are identified and prioritized, it is fully green, I think, which means all the practices for identifying which asset goes into which services cause, all that stuff is done. Whereas assets are inventoried and authority and responsibility of these assets are established, 2 practices seems to be incomplete. Yellow means incomplete, means it is being done, but not fully. The relationship between assets and services they support is established, that seems to be fine. Asset inventory is managed. Now, this asset inventory at that time, if I remember correctly, was a spreadsheet, right. So, spreadsheet cannot be easily managed, right, because it can be replicated. See, if you have a database which is highly guarded and only people who are in charge of that database is allowed to update that database and so on, then it can be managed. But if it is an Excel sheet, it can be copied around, right. So, it is not managed, and multiple copies means there will be inconsistency, right. Access to assets is managed. This is almost there, but there seems to be some cases this is not proper, some practices seem to be missing, and then information assets are categorized and managed, like which one is critical, which one is not critical, and so on. So, that seems to be a little bit of lacking, and the facility assets are prioritized and managed, that seems to be fine. So, you see that in asset management we are yellow, because the domain will get the color that is the lowest color of all the different goals, right. So, then the next one is the control management. In control management we seem to be not so good. So, we have like out of 4 goals, none of the goals are fully green at that time, and its majority incomplete, right. So, this is something that is of concern. In terms of the configuration and change management, it seems that life cycle of asset is managed, asset configuration baselines are established. This one I do not know if stick files and all are being used for benchmarking and or not, but at least that is what the collected data. Now, remember, each of these domains was done by different groups, and some groups are more serious, they actually probed lot more than the other group, like whatever, right. So, I am not, I mean, do not take this the evaluation results seriously, right. First of all, it is old. Second is that groups are groups were of different quality, different training and all that stuff. Plus these are novice, basically they are not like they are not like homeland security cyber resilience experts. So take it more like as an illustrative example and not exactly what the real situation is. Now then this is also yellow, this domain is also yellow. Now we have vulnerability management. Here we see that there are problem, that we have reds. Now if we have reds, that means that the entire thing become red, right. So now if we go further, we have here I think service continuity management, service, so before that I think we missed something here, which is incident, after vulnerability we have incident management. Incident management is quite lacking here, you know, in terms of lot of red, so entire incident management gets red. Service continuity management also for this small thing becomes red. And then we have the risk management. Risk management is yellow, and then I have you know, external dependency management seems to be yellow as well, and then awareness is yellow, and situational awareness, that is we do not have a SOC. So obviously situational awareness is low, so it will be red. Now what good is it? Note that I mean as I said repeatedly that don't take it with a grain of salt about the real status of the situation, but what good is such a you know, if we assuming that it was done by real experts and assuming this is a true picture, what can we say here? So here you see this is a low hanging fruit. If I want to make this guy green, I can easily do this because I have only a little bit of practices that are incomplete, right. Now I have situational awareness, I get the idea that it is in a real bad shape, so I have to do something about it, but it is not a low hanging fruit. It probably will require a lot of activity, budget, buying expensive SOC and all that stuff. And then if you look at this one, this also requires a lot of work. So I will start with, for example, so I have to decide like where I should start with. So I would probably start with asset management, and then I will also try to, at the same time I try to fix this red and then this red and so on. So this will give you a picture of where we are and how to now go about approaching the you know, better maturity. So I actually see that we do not have a single goal which is green. Do we have? So none of the domains are green. So now then the maturity level is actually 0, right. Now it also gives you more information. So in order to know the maturity questions, so those are questions about practices. So for each of these there are also maturity questions. The questions for maturity level 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are different, and you see that in asset management we are not so bad in the sense that we have now you see that this is red, this is red, this is red, because I am not even at this maturity level. So all these things are red by, because I have to answer all this in green, only then if I see here I am partially answering this to green, and these are also partial, but I am still red, because in order to make this even yellow I need to get this as green, right. So this gives you a very visual idea about where we are standing and where you know, where to start the improvement. So this is you know, for each of these you know, so we see that, you know, where we are with respect to this questions. It also tells you in the previous NIST 1.1 framework where we are with respect to what is my score. So, NIST framework, like remember we said NIST framework has identify, protect, detect, respond and recover, right, and now NIST 2.0 has govern also. So, in each of these there are also subcategories, like for example identification, asset management is part of the identification because you are identifying assets. The business environment, you have to identify your business environment because that tells you what services are critical, what services are not critical and what is your threat environment and so on. In the previous version of NIST also governance was part of identification, risk assessment is part of identification and risk management strategy is another part of identification. So, in this we are seeing that we are actually how we are doing with respect to these subcategories of identify function. Clearly we are not fully doing identify function, we are 57% into the identification function, whereas in the protect we are at 53%. So, these numbers are not important, what it is showing you is that by doing this evaluation assessment you can actually get a rough approximate idea about where we are with respect to each of these. So, each of the NIST functionality. So, if you were like 100% in each of these, then you could have said that I am NIST, I am very NIST compliant, I am NIST CSF compliant, right. That is not, that is a very tall order, even the best banks probably will not get 100% in each of these, but they might get close. So, that is where the NIST this thing. It also tells you it gives you another view of which questions you are missing, which questions you answered partial, which questions you answered no. So, that gives you an overall view. So, these are for after assessment analysis by the CISO and his team or her team to decide how to go about fixing all this, right, whatever is missing. So, that and they also have to make a goal, right. So, for example, some organizations they will say will first fix the most critical ones, the ones that and then will fix the ones that are less critical and so on. Some will say okay, will first fix low hanging fruits, then the ones that will require a lot of investment and manpower etc., expertise to fix. So, that kind of stuff. So, you see this graph. So, this graph is actually where you are with respect to the four domains. This is the for the different mill. So, you are almost there if mill 1, the one that is showing very poorly is situational awareness, you are less than 50%. In some of these you are almost there, you are above 3/4. Incident management also you are actually just like about 60%, maybe 57, 56%. Vulnerability management, your configuration management you are doing almost there, and asset management you are not too bad. So, you have to use these graphs to decide how you are going to go about planning your next 3 months, 6 months and so on, and you have to present that to your top level executives to show where you are and where you want to be. So, you may actually draw this additional color here saying that where you will be in quarter and in the next quarter and where you will be in the next quarter and so on, so that you have a plan. So, this is another view of percentage of practices completed. So, you see that in the controls management we are less than 20%, in the incident management we are less than 40%, and In the situational awareness also we are less than 20%. So, these are some of the major concerns, and this is the view that your board will like to see, and and ask you that show me in the next quarter board meeting where you will be, where you are, and at that time show this graph also. If we see no improvement, then we are going to you will lose your job. Unfortunately, CISOs don't easily lose their job, because I asked one of the board members of a bank, and he said, I can fire the CISO, but where will I get the next one, right? So, there is not enough well trained people for CISO. So, therefore, if you want to become a CISO, you have a good chance, you will make a lot of money, except that it takes some time. It may take you 10 years to become a CISO. You won't get a CISO job right away unless it's a very small company. But the CISO's job is to actually make this thing better to the level where all these things should be around here, or maybe even higher, right. So, that is where the visualization will help him to show that he is making progress, right. So, this is further analysis of where these things are and so on. We will not get into the details of that, but you get the idea about where how these things work. And since we did not get a chance for you to do this yourself, I just wanted to show you what it looks like if you do this. This is a pretty large document, but most of this is automatically filled by the script. See, as you answer the questions, everything else comes by automatically. This is the beauty of this instrumentation of this PDF. So, you do not have to do all this, and you get something that you can show your management that this is where we are, and then next time you do it, you show where you are, you show the two graphs side by side, and that shows the progress you have made over a quarter or over 2 quarters, whatever you have done. So, that's where we are with respect to this. So, I'm not. So, I have slides discussing all this that I just discussed. What are the different MIL scales, incomplete, performed, planned, managed, measured and defined, what they are, and also how to do self assessment. You have to decide whether you are going to scope based on service, or you want to scope based on organization. And then what are the key roles, like there would be a sponsor usually who would have a broad understanding and importance and components of the service for which the self assessment is being done. So, usually it is the owner of that particular service. There would be a facilitator either from inside the organization or from the Homeland Security, and then there would be subject matter experts who will interpret the questions for you, because you may not even know what it means to do something like a asset, assign or connect an asset to a particular service, or what it means to do control, defining the controls and so on and so forth. So, you need subject matter experts. Then you basically decide who are the subject matter experts and participants for each of these domains. Not every domain, the guys who are involved in an organization in asset management may not be doing risk management or incident management, right. So, obviously, it would be different set of people. There may be some intersection there, and then you normally do this in a workshop mode. So, you bring everybody together and you actually do a workshop, day-long workshop. So, you have to tell what are the terms and terminology that you use, what are the services that you are going to put in the assessment, like not necessarily all services may be assessed, what is the organizational environment, context, what are the implemented practices, when do you say a practice is implemented, when do you say it is not, and then response scale like yes, no or partial, and then some follow on activities, what you will do after the assessment is completed. You generate the report, then what are you going to do after that, So then, we went through this, interpreting the self-assessment report. So some basic rules of, we already went through this, and we already discussed that if you get all the, so we are in the report that I showed you is MIL 0. So some goals are achieved. MIL 1 is that all goals are achieved. So we didn't get any of the, in the report that I showed, there was not a single domain at MIL 1, and unless you are in MIL 1 you cannot be MIL 2. MIL 2 requires additional questions and so on and so forth. So we discussed this, and this is how the performance summary looks like. We already looked at this. So that's it. So we'll stop here for the resilience review part of the course, and now we will move on to next class. We will move on to the threat intelligence sharing with sticks. So that's where I think that's more or less where we will be. Next week we may do some evening classes, additional evening classes to finish this curriculum. Okay, thank you.